What exactly is the purpose of that strange Anthony at the wedding? Spooky tales await. Subscribe now. I've only shared this story with those closest to me, but every time I go back to it, fear twists my gut and I instantly get goosebumps and tears welling up in my eyes. Before I tell you guys about it, a little bit of background about me first. At the time, I'm 40 years old, married with 2 children, enjoy walking nature in the mountains and take photos when the weather permits. I'm not religious, but I try to hold on to Cartesian thinking this evening of August 2nd. 2017, all the indicators are green to go and take photos of the Milky Way in the mountains. I'm hoping to get some nice shots with fire trees or trees. At least at 10 p.m. I throw my gear in my trunk and head up to a village 30 minutes away, arriving at Bullet. Everything's set up, but the weather decides to play a trick on me and the sky is filled with high-altitude cloud. Suddenly. It's not the first time that this has happened, and after a look at the satellite animations a little further on, the sky seems more cooperative. I take to the road again, heading for LC Crudine, a well-known geological circle in the region where I live. When I arrive near the parking lot that leads to the path to get there, I am greeted by numerous flashing lights, police, fire department, ambulance. Everyone is there at the top of the mountain in the middle of the forest. I am stopped and questioned about my presence and I explain why I want to go up there. The police explain that the site is not accessible and ask me to leave. I am getting tired and decided to go home empty-handed, but that's for another time. But then a shiver suddenly runs down my spine. I've been driving through the forest for a few minutes. When I come to a clearing, I was driving slowly for fear of running over nocturnal animals, and there in my headlights there's this. Well, he's there at the side of the road. It's there. My eyes are riveted to this thing. I'll only see him for a few seconds in the end and the time that it takes to overtake the car, but it feels like an eternity here. He's tall, very tall, over 2 m at least. He's also very skinny, sickly skinny, and his skin is white as a full sledge, completely naked as well. He has a little bit of black hair that's sort of toss-led on his head. His arms are crossed over his chest, immense fingers dangling from the tips of his hands, and he's covered in what seems like maybe blood everywhere. He follows me with his eyes staring into mine. I am overcome by primal fear. My whole body is screaming at me to flee, to get away as fast as I can. It's as if my survival instinct is suddenly begging me to get as far away from here as possible. By reflex, I mash the gas pedal and drive at breakneck speed to reach the edge of the lake and leave this forest that oppresses me here. I keep looking in the rearview mirror, unaware of the danger I'm exposing myself to by driving at this speed. The tears of fear are streaming down my face and their abs absolutely uncontrollable. Honestly, I'm terrified to my core, like a 5-year-old whose light has gone out in a cellar. When I finally reach the edge of the lake, I pull over to the side of the road and try to regain my composure, clinging to reality and the rationality that has always built my life like a lifeline. I feel like I'm suddenly going mad. I'm thinking that maybe somebody has had a car accident and was in distress and I didn't stop to help, or something. I hate myself for having reacted so badly. If that's the case, for having been overwhelmed by unreasonable fear. So I call the police, still breathing hard. I tell them who I am, that I haven't been drinking or taking drugs and that they'll probably think that I'm crazy, but no, they are benevolent and listen to me all the way. I finally get home, and my fear explodes in my belly. This look never leaving me and piercing me again. I tell him what happened to me, and I start crying again 2 hours later at 3 in the morning. The police, they ring my doorbell. There are 3 of them, and they are obviously taking this very seriously. They asked me for more details about the time and the place. Luckily, I know the place perfectly well and give them the GPS coordinates of what happened. The next day, the cruiser van where I was heading made the headlines in the local papers. Apparently 2 people had died there in the middle of the night in a microlight accident, with no news from the police. After several days, I contacted them and also learned that a carcass had also been found several kilometers away, with no one at the wheel, but that I had done the right thing by not stopping. I'm 47 years old now and I've been back to that place many times day and night, because it's a place that I really love. I've always found it hard to believe in the supernatural, even though I'm convinced that many things go beyond our understanding of the world and shatter our certainties. But this one thing, this one event, it always has me questioning everything. I have 4 weird experiences from when I was working on ship. The first one was midway across the Atlantic. In 2013, me and a few other cadets, we were on the bridge wing outdoor part of the wheelhouse for our celestial navigation project. We saw a light coming from the east fly at high speed until it was almost directly above us, and make a 90 turn, and zip over even faster. It was at the altitude that you would expect to see a plane at, but nothing turns when crossing the ocean, and especially that fast. I don't think that people could even survive a turn that quick anyway. The second was an animal sighting. This time, I was a cadet on another container ship, and we had just left Dutch Harbor, aka heading for Japan. We were about halfway between the two and the hundreds of miles from land. It was choppy and overcast and the Maritime. I saw a large school of porpoise and seabirds, which typically would indicate that they were following fish. In the middle of the group, though, we see a huge white fin come up that looks like a whale's paddle fin. It could have been a whale, I admit, but we have never seen anything that big before. The third one, though, was definitely the weirdest. I was out of school and working on a seagoing tugboat in the Gulf of Mexico. At the time I didn't see it, but I came up to stand my watch at 15:45 and the 2 guys up there had weird looks on their faces. One looks to the other and says, "Should we tell him?" I ask, and they proceed to say that they had just watched a beach ball-sized bubble with pulsing lights on the inside fly in front of the boat, about 10 feet above water. They said that it was moving against the wind at a constant speed, and the outside of it looked like when there's an oil in a puddle in your driveway. The last one was in the Gulf of Mexico again, and this one was the longest. So me and a few others were sitting in the mess watching TV, and the captain called down on the phone. He asked us if we wanted to see a UFO. We all went up and 4 of us sat there in the wheelhouse, and watched a red light sort of erratically snap from one position to another a short distance away for about 2 hours. It would sit in a spot for about 15 to 20 seconds, and then snap to a new position in a straight line and sit there. The best way that I could describe it is that it would be like putting a laser pointer on a wall and jerking it around to a new spot a few inches away. Eventually, though, it just took off at high speed and that was that so. I worked in the radiology department in a hospital in Cardiff, Wales, UK, for about 3 years as an admin and clerical officer, before getting a promotion working in medicine. During these 3 years I saw a lot of things, ranging from patients dying in the MRI scanners to patients having an X-ray for inserting a meat thermometer into their urethra. Yeah, that's a real thing. Nights always seem the craziest too. But one time a patient came in with armed police after an altercation, which involved a knife in the middle of the city center, and just so happened that the person he had the altercation with was having an X-ray too. This caused a second altercation right in front of me. Chairs were thrown, a trash bin or 2 and then wheelchair. Even so have seen things, some funny, some stressful, some sad and many bonkers. But this one night, it was something scary, so I would start a night shift at about 1900, then would work till about 8:30 in the next morning. This was the standard night shift for our department. We would usually do 3 nights in a row before doing 4 days off. After the 3rd night you were ready to sleep for a week. Let me tell you, but the strange thing was that this was my first night of the 3, so I wasn't tired at all. It started off normal. I arrived at the department, took over from the day's staff, logged into my PC. During this time, we usually would set up our phones or tablets to watch movies or maybe even the latest TV series, as there would be a lot of downtime between patients. Like I said too, the first few hours. Nothing that interesting, just your average run-of-the-mill night in radiology. Then it came to my break. And now, before I tell you more, I should probably explain the layout of the hospital. This hospital is the largest in Wales. It's a teaching hospital, and it's pretty old now. The best way to get from A to B in this hospital is through what we call the tunnels or the catacombs. These consist of very dimly lit corridors, old abandoned rooms, tunnels and other creepy sort of decrepit areas. The morgue is also found in these corridors, so it's not a nice place to be during the day, let alone the middle of the night, but it's the quickest way to get to places, if you're staff that is. There's always been rumors too and mumblings of like strange things happening in these tunnels. Some people say that they saw ghosts in old-fashioned porter uniforms taking wheelchairs to pick up patients. Others say that they've seen shadows following them from the corner of their eyes. But one person has claimed that they were attacked by a person wearing an old nurse's uniform from the 70s. This place is creepy too, even at the best of times, but for me it just never really fazed me. I guess I've been down there hundreds of times before. The worst experience up to this point was having a SLES pipe drip human waste on my head. That in itself was a horror show, but tonight would be something altogether different and honestly maybe not even of this physical world. So, like I said before, it was a very quiet night. I had been watching the latest series of One Piece, because I'm a bit of a geek. During my downtime, a radiographer, or radiology technician, for my American friends out there came to take over and cover for me for my break. I decided to go to the 5th floor, where the Sanctuary Multifaith Chapel was located on a night shift. It was one of the most peaceful places in the hospital, but to get there I had to walk through those tunnels to reach the nearest elevator. I set off on my journey, which would usually take about 15 minutes, scanned my card on the main entrance to the tunnels and then proceeded to walk through 2 minutes in. I started to feel like someone was walking behind me, though it being a busy hospital and basically the tunnels acted like the highway. I didn't think anything of it. Suddenly I heard panting like someone was trying to catch their breath after going for an intense run. I turned around to check, but saw nothing a bit strange, but thought that it was nothing. Maybe just one of the pipes above my head creaking, or a generator pumping. So I carried on walking, but I kept feeling like someone or something was watching me and was walking behind me. Out of sheer confusion and a fear that I missed my turn towards the elevators and found myself in a large section of the tunnels that I've never been in before, IDED, with old stretchers, beds, hospital furniture and equipment. Some of this stuff was over 50 years old, maybe older, just left to decay in a dark, smelly decrepit, and dusty corridor. This was starting to really creep me out, because in all of this confusion, I realized suddenly that I must be lost. It almost felt like I had fallen into the back rooms. Everything sort of looked the same. I could feel a tightening in my chest and could feel the start of a panic attack. I remember clutching my chest and running down a corridor, trying to find a signpost or something to tell me where I was. The sense that something was watching me though got stronger. Suddenly I felt something hit my arm in force, almost like someone using a baseball bat. I remember falling to the ground, pulled myself across the floor towards the cold dusty wall, and looked around frantically trying to find an explanation to what the heck just hit me. Then something caught my eye. It was almost like a black mist with glowing red eyes. It was about 20 m away from me, just hovering in the middle of the corridor. Was this the thing that had been stalking me the entire time? I got back up and I sprinted. I ran down what felt like 100 different corridors, until finally I found a housekeeper, or a janitor. He asked me what was wrong, because I looked pale, but I couldn't get any words out. He then grabbed me by the arms with a firm grip, and said, "Did you see it too?" And that was the last time that I ever stepped foot in those tunnels. To this day, I hear rumors of strange things there. I'm not sure what I saw that night. Obviously maybe I was tired, maybe I was stressed, maybe it was something, though why else would the janitor ask me to if I had seen it? What else is down there? Well, I can tell you that one thing is for sure, I won't be going to find out. My experience starts in New Mexico, west of Clayton, on 422. I was drilling for a small M&P company with a hydraulic rig, which only took 2 people to operate, which was my younger brother and I. It was hot that summer and the rig would overheat. It was always during the day, so I told the boss man that we would drill at night, and that way there would be no issues. My little brother had the company truck and I had my personal vehicle, which was a 2003 Tahoe. I also had my girlfriend with me at the time, so we agreed to meet at the job site after dark. We live like an hour away in Texas. Anyway, you would pull off 422, just after the road tees to another small town that I don't know the name of, and you would have to open and close at least 5 gates to get to this spot, some steel and some barbed wire. Even when I got there, I fired up the rig and generator, turned on the lights to check equipment. Everything seemed good, so I shut it back down to wait for my brother. I folded the back seat down, and I was going to try and sleep for a little bit while my brother was headed out towards us. So me and the girlfriend jumped in the back of the Tahoe to get some shad, and that was when I noticed just how pitch black it was in this pasture. There was no moon or no stars, nothing, just darkness about this time, and I see what looks like headlights at a good distance, far enough that it looked just like one headlight instead of 2 separate headlights, which seemed like they were headed our direction, but not from the direction that we came from a different direction to the east. I was puzzled by this, and we watched this light come down that appeared to be county roads, still thinking that it was headlights, but it still never got close enough that it split into 2 separate lights, so it was still pretty far away. But anyhow, we are sitting there watching it head our direction, and all of a sudden it does a spiral move and disappeared, like as if you were to stand outside with your finger, draw a spiral in the air. But imagine it was like 5 miles away. Seeing this, I instantly knew that it was not a car anymore. I look over at her and ask, "Did you see that?" She did, and hugs me tightly, as we talked about it, trying to wrap our heads around what we just saw. She points out this red glow. That's coming toward us, though, toward my truck slowly from the east, and honestly I was in a state of disbelief, sitting there quietly trying to come up with any logical explanation for what this glowing red mist could be. I thought it must be a brake light. No, the brake pedal is clear of anything that could press it, and the rig and the generator were off. Looking around for anything as a solution. I look over and ask, "Are you seeing this? I'm not tripping or nothing, right?" She said, "No, this is happening. Let's get out of here." I said, "No, let's see what." Once about that time, this sort of mist surrounded the back half of my Tahoe. Looking out of the window seemed like looking through a red filter, but not just red, almost like an ultraviolet red, a filter, but without the black light. She then said, "Let's go now," and I said, "Wait," trying to figure out what was happening. And that's when I heard a knock on the rear passenger quarter panel. It scared the absolute heck out of both of us. She screamed, which made me panic, so I turned around to start my truck up. I couldn't find the key for a split second, but when I did I put it in and turned the switch on, but nothing happened. Like the battery was dead, no light, no radio. Then a split second later, the engine would turn over, but still no lights. There was now a second thought on the rear quarter. The truck turned on. We looked around and everything was normal again. The headlights came on, but we left out of there right then and there, and obviously I didn't drill that well, the boss man did, and we ended up meeting my brother at one of the many gates to get on the property. I tried to tell him what had happened and he said that something had hit his truck too, but brushed it off as a stick or something. I told my boss about it. He thought that I was at drugs and to this day still believes this, and honestly, I still don't know what the heck it was. I don't think it wanted to harm us, because the whole thing just kind of happened. It didn't seem sort of intended. I suppose, like I just so happened to be in its path, or it wanted to see what the bright lights were way out in the middle of nowhere. Honestly, though, that's a wild guess and I really don't know, but I am wondering if anyone has any similar stories to this or any information on what this could have been. I have wanted to go back and check it out at some point, but also I really don't want to get shot by a rancher and honestly, I don't want to experience that again either. Since my daughter 18 months was able to wave babble and generally interact with people, she's been interacting with someone or something hiding in our closet. It all started with waving. I made the joke that there's a ghost in there, but at the time I didn't actually believe it. Our dogs like to sleep in the closet, so I just figured that she was waving to her. There was only one problem, though, with that explanation. Anytime she waved, my dog was nowhere near the closet. Then she started babbling. She'd have full-on babble conversations with the closet. We brushed it off as her just being goofy, but sometimes she would hold up toys to show the closet and then babble about it, like she was doing a show and tell. Now she's starting to use full sentences, and just this morning she looked over at the closet and said, "Hi, I see you," and waved. This is the first coherent sentence that she has said towards the closet, and it's definitely a little bit unnerving again. My dog wasn't in there and she's laying at the foot of the bed. The closet is a small walk-in style closet. There's some built-in shelving up top, some plastic shelving we added, and the door is off the hinges and leaning against the built-in shelving because it fell off and we need to fix it. There isn't a single thing in there that looks like a human or anything. I've always been a bit sensitive to these things, but more so when I was a kid. I like to think that if there was something in that closet, that I would feel it, but now I'm doubting myself for context. We live in a trailer built in the 80s, not even an old house. As far as I know, the only deaths that have happened in this house were a couple of pets the previous owner had, and when my daughter talks to whatever is in there, she always looks up like a tall person is standing there rather than a cat or a dog. So I've known about the black-eyed children urban legend for some time, but I may have had an actual encounter with one years ago. This happened in Portland, Oregon, around David Douglas High School. I looked up black-eyed children and there have actually been a few encounters and reports of them in Portland back in the 90s. I believe this encounter, though, happened to me during my high school years, so around 2009 to 2011. I can't remember the exact year, but I want to say I was about 14 at the time, and it was late around 12 or 1 in the morning, maybe a bit later, but I believe it was a weekend anyway. My brother and I were up watching South Park, and we heard a knocking on our garage window. Then I heard a knocking at our window. We had one of those huge windows that covered the front of the house. The curtains were up, but I peeked out of the side and saw a woman. She looked very pale, with black hair, and her eyes were really dark. Now she very well could have been a tweaker. I know, but it's the next part that creeps me out the most. So after knocking on the window, she then knocks on the door and asks us to let her in. Me being the person that I am, I'm like, heck no, but my brother, who was like 10 of the time, walks over to the door and says that he's going to let her in. I have to forcibly hold him down until the person leaves. My mom and her boyfriend wake up from hearing me holding down my brother. They ask if somebody knocked on the door, and I tell them what just happened. One thing that I had heard is with black-eyed children encounters, that it's sometimes they'll force people to do things with no recollection of them doing it. Why I bring this up is that I ask my brother if he remembers the lady the knocking or trying to let her in, and he always tells me that he doesn't. To this day, the experience really creeps me out, since I have first heard of the black-eyed children phenomena, because everyone who has claimed to have had an experience with them have said exactly what I experienced. So I know that this is most likely going to sound made up, and honestly, that's why I haven't posted it or shared it anywhere yet, but I just cannot seem to get it off my mind, and I am wondering if anybody has any information, or maybe even a similar experience to compare it with. So I was out in Long Island, New York, around the beginning of the new year 2022, when I went out for a late-night drive with two friends of mine. We were about 40 minutes away from my house, when we started feeling just a really heavy presence surrounding us, as we went down a specific road. My friend asked if we could turn around and go down the other turn instead, but doing that led us to a dead end. So we had to go back as we drove down the road. That felt menacing. We passed a cemetery at one stage, which had two what appeared to be humans standing in robes, facing a statue of the Blessed Mother, and waving what looked like maybe a wand towards it. As we drove by, we noticed that it seemed odd, so we drove into the gate and parked a few feet away from them to watch them. They honestly appeared to be statues at first, but then, without even moving, they started facing us and they started waving their wands over us too. The weirdest thing, though, was that their faces looked largely expressionless, but also had features that really I can only describe as a mix between a witch and maybe a pig. My friend that was driving, he instantly took off upon seeing their faces, and we started to head home. All of us feeling like something malicious was there. As we got further into the drive, we then realized that we were being told to go back in the same direction by the GPS, as the GPS had rerouted us back to the same coordinates that they were at. Needless to say, we did not follow the GPS or go back there, but we all returned home that night and we also felt sick all night, each of us, which was really weird anyway. Some time had passed and I had told another friend of mine about this experience, and he said that he wanted to go there because he had never experienced anything like it. We went and he started feeling sick as we pulled up again, so he kept driving and we left, but later on that night he said that he was home with only his girlfriend and they both heard what seemed to be something running up to the door and violently slamming on it, which also knocked some of the stuff on their shelves down, but when they went looking through the house, there was nobody there. I cannot find any information on anything like this, and I am very tempted to go back, but I just can't get myself to actually do it just yet, out of fear and probably just a lack of understanding. I've been busy dealing with the wake of a family tragedy, but now that things are returning to the new normal, I figured that this was a good time to share this. So first I'll describe the nightmare. It's a very short dream. It's a very clear memory, just because of how scary it was, I guess, but I was about 4 or 5 years old, perhaps 6 at most, and my twin brother, and I had a bunk bed in a room at the farthest end of the house that we grew up in the nightmare. It had me in my bed, looking out the window to see a red sky, the kind that it gets in the early dawn hours before sunrise, but light still colors the sky. The next and the only other thing that I can remember in this nightmare is that a man with crazy blue-colored eyes and a bald head appears at the window and stares right at me. The nightmare ends there, but I remember just how much I screamed and screamed about it. I don't know where my brother was at the time when I woke up screaming, and the only thing that I can remember from when I woke up was having my mom come and get me and calm me down as she took me to her bedroom down the hall. I only remember that so well because I wonder where my dad was at the time. Anyway, fast forward to this May, and my father is in hospital in the country that he lives in Colombia, and my twin brother and older sister are staying in a hotel about 5 minutes walk away from the hospital that is staying in the ICU. At one night, after a long day of being there for Dad and for the extended family, my siblings and I return to the hotel and sit together to have a couple of beers and try to relax. After all of that, we start discussing things, trying to unwind, but somehow the discussion of nightmares and dreams come up and I bring up the story that I mentioned earlier without missing a beat. My sister straight up explains that had really happened, that some guy really did look through my window, and that she remembers the whole thing. My sister, she's 5 years older than my brother and I, so this would make her 9 to 10 years old, had her bedroom adjacent to the bedroom. My brother and I shared her room faced our front lawn and street, while our room faced the neighbor's house and their driveway, with a very low fence between the two houses. While she didn't get into too much detail about the days before the nightmares or the event, she said that she had been followed by a bold man in a truck as she rode her bike home, with some friends a couple of times before. The day immediately before this nightmare was no different, but the man this time actually drove right past the house. At the time she was a latchkey kid, since my brother and I had to go to a special school about 45 minutes away from our hometown. It was for a speech impediment issue that many twins have, and my mom had to pick us up rather than be home for my sister after school. But she was never home alone for more than maybe max an hour anyway. That afternoon and evening was pretty normal, as she remembers it. My dad came home from his job. He worked as a part-time cop and worked in a local hardware store, and we all had dinner, did homework, played, and did usual family things before bed. That night, though, at around 12:00 to 1 in the morning, this bald-headed dude had parked down the street at a small industrial park and walked up to our house and apparently tried to get in through my sister's window, which woke her up and she screamed when she saw the man nearly opening the window, as it wasn't locked. My dad stormed in and tried to shove the guy out, or tried to hit him with the nightstick that he had. My sister doesn't remember exactly, but this caused the guy to run off, but only for a short time, as apparently he came back a moment later to try and get into the window in my room. He tried opening the window, but it was locked because my mom didn't want my brother and I to open it, because our bed was right up against it. My sister said that I screamed as loud as I could, and my mom went in to get my brother and I, while my dad tried to go after this guy by running out the front door to chase him. Unfortunately, it was to no avail. In the end the guy hauled, but right back through our backyard. The way our backyard was situated, it had it backed up right against a small rail yard that is part of the aforementioned small industrial park down the street from us. Between our small neighborhood and the rail yard was a good amount of very dense trees that always made the backyards very dark. So my dad, he didn't want to get attacked by him there, so instead he went back inside to our house, called the police, then our elderly neighbor, to make sure that they were okay, while our mom took care of us kids. And that was all my sister could remember from that night herself, as this was a very long time ago. Neither of us could recall anything else after that either, and the story just sort of stops right there for both of us. My father sadly passed away in the hospital, so we aren't able to ask him, and given that all of us haven't had the chance to ask our mom yet, but maybe we'll ask her soon, but we aren't sure exactly what happened after that. For now, though, it has become obvious that alleged nightmare that I had, well, it wasn't a nightmare after all. Instead, it was probably an attempted home invasion and a kidnapping. I work full-time as a deputy sheriff in a very rural part of the northern US, right outside of a Native American reservation. Although I do several things for the sheriff's office, I mainly work inside the sheriff's building itself and the jail. In my time in law enforcement, I've seen many things I can't understand, but here are some of the most memorable. Inside the jail lies a medium security housing unit. The inmates stay within their cells from 2200 to 0500. During that time, several inmates are allowed out to assist with cleaning and laundry duties. I've always had a bit of a weird feeling inside of this cell block, but every once in a while, my fellow officers, and even some inmates, see a man that we call the Watcher. Late at night, as officers walk the cell block, we will occasionally see a man behind us wearing white inmate worker clothes. Sometimes it's when you turn your head to check behind you, and sometimes it's right in front of you. Even you never seem to know when you'll see him, and a double take results in him always being gone. He appears to every officer the same, and as some senior guys, it's a bit of a rite of passage went for younger officers to ask about the long-haired old guy out of his cell at night. This is also compounded by the fact that odd cries for help are heard occasionally, only for officers to run out of the office checking shelter cell for someone in distress, only to find no one awake. I personally have heard my last name called to me while sitting in this housing unit. I heard it plain as day right next to me, in fact only for no one to be awakened. All the inmates asleep and accounted for. This particular housing unit has a long history of suicides, overdoses, and violent fights for the better majority of the last 3 decades. My first paranormal encounter here started even without my prior knowledge, and other officers only disclosed the information after I inquired. The kitchen is another hotbed of activity too, with the two spirits appearing in the same manner and performing the same activities to each that see them. The first, it's a larger man, maybe 6 foot 250 pounds. Nearly every officer who has seen him describes him in the same context. He can be seen as soon as you unlock the kitchen and look up from your keys. He's dressed in white kitchen worker clothes, standing at the sink washing his hands, as if he's about to start his shift. My first encounters happened right after I was off FTO and started night shift for nearly 2 weeks straight. I would see him and I would always do a double take, only to see nothing in his place. For weeks, I thought I was honestly going crazy not asking anyone about him. It was only after one day that my supervisor comes running into the office screaming about seeing something in the kitchen, only for his horror to be compounded. When I gave an exact description of the individual and the task that he was performing, my supervisor, who is a devout Mormon, an airmed critic of anything supernatural, was scared so badly that he refused to enter the kitchen for a very long period of time after that. The second spirit of the kitchen, though, is the exact opposite of the man in white. He is faceless and only a faint orange glow is seen, the same shade as an inmate jumpsuit. Perhaps he's seen when you go to lock the kitchen door, the squeak of an inmate's shoe is heard and an orange glow rushes you, as if he's trying to escape the kitchen before the door is closed. The kitchen also has a history of inmate death, with records from the 90s reporting an inmate breaking in and using the kitchen knives to well end his own life. But no place in the entire jail has more horror and terror than the maximum security wing. Activity is non-stop, from random door slamming to lights burning on and off. But personal favorite of mine is when you're in there. Inmates can be seen at night walking the top tiers on cameras and in person. Only for you to rush in about to confront an inmate for being out bunk up only for every door to be secure. There's random screams that are heard coming from areas where no inmates are housed. Footsteps happen so regularly that many officers don't even react anymore. But my all-time favorite is the time when an officer witnessed a female inmate through one-way glass exit her cell in the middle of the night without him unlocking it. The inmate proceeded to wrap a noose around her neck, climb the railing and jump off the top tier. Several officers witnessed this happen too. Radio calls to dispatch were made. Emergency tones rang out only for the officers to open the cell block door, make entry and see nothing. The odd thing about this incident, though, is that this cell block only housed male inmates, but several years prior was a dedicated female housing block. One place in the jail that has been terrible, in particular over the last several months or years, is Cell 19. It has housed dozens of inmates, but most either have a mental episode that results in them being institutionalized or moved out within a few days. Examples include completely normal inmates going to bed only for them to wake up in the morning, screaming, rushing out, and giving evangelical sermons warding off evil. Normal inmates getting housed, only to have a horror show of health issues in the day following heart attacks, strokes and seizures for inmates normally of good or moderate health. In the most recent case, an inmate who was a prior co-worker of mine at another job attacked several officers inside the cell, following cries for help. It took 6 officers, a taser, pepper spray and a restraining chair to subdue the guy. The reason why officers responded: he was choking out his cellmate completely without cause. Following this, the inmate was placed in an observation area, but was seen taking off his socks and shoving them into his mouth only for him to be saved from passing out. When an officer took them out, the inmate in question the next day was seen looking directly into the camera and breaking his hand, seemingly without any pain. That man, mind you, is in his 70s. Too many things can be explained to, simply being because of the high-stress environment and the nature of jail and many things experienced by officers with no prior knowledge of the happenings, and the fact that they happen so often is why I felt the need to share this. If you think that any of this is false, then simply consider it entertainment, I suppose, but I can assure you that I've lived through it and it is not pretty, so I am not one of those people that get sleep paralysis as frequently. It hasn't happened since this first time, and as far as I know, the same goes for the others involved. The gist is that 10-ish years ago me, and my best friend, and my dad had very similar first sleep paralysis episodes on the same night. Granted, as far as sleep paralysis goes, the experiences were pretty textbook. We each woke up, couldn't move, felt dread and fear, and could see a dark figure barely in a field of vision in my room. It was squatting in front of my door. My friend says that it was inside his bed, and for my dad he actually says that it was sitting on his chair strangling him. I know that these episodes by themselves are pretty textbook, but what I cannot explain is the timing of it, with seemingly no common causal factor between us. At that time, my dad and I were in the same house, but we didn't know about each other's experiences until the next day. As for my friend, he wasn't staying with us that night, but he did live right down the street from us. So am I wrong for thinking the timing of this is too peculiar? It was the first and only time any of us had sleep paralysis on the same night, even in the same area. I feel like the odds of that happening must be very small, and if there was in fact nothing peculiar about that night, it must just be a coincidence with stupidly astronomical odds. Nearly a decade later, everyone's stories haven't charmed too, that friend and I. We've talked about it a few times since then, and the one time that I've asked my dad about it, he remembered it vividly, too. So to conclude, I still have no explanation for this, and it makes me wonder if there really is something more to sleep paralysis. Do any of you know of any similar cases that were suspiciously coincidental, like this? Or maybe there's a potential natural explanation that I've missed. Was this mere coincidence, or just highly strange? So last night I awoke to the unsettling noise of loud banging and my dog's frantic barking. Living alone with my girlfriend, we are accustomed to our neighbors' domestic disputes, and I have called the police often on them. I stumbled to the bathroom, as the walls there were pretty thin and separated our duplex from theirs. As I approached the bathroom door, the entire house was dark and a tall shadow was in my bathtub. I wasn't wearing my glasses and I am incredibly nearsighted, so I struggled to discern at first whether the shadow was merely the shower curtain, or what it was, but then the shadow spoke. I don't know what he said, but the gut-wrenching panic I felt is still fresh. I screamed and fled back to my bedroom, slamming the door behind me. My girlfriend, now awake and terrified, joined me as I dialed the police. They instructed me to lock the door, but my bedroom doesn't have one. With the banging growing louder and more aggressive, I braced myself against the door, praying that help would arrive in time. To my relief, the police arrived swiftly in only 5 minutes. When I finally emerged from the bedroom, I found that they had dragged him naked from the bathtub because he had been trying to shower. Apparently they were questioning him on my couch while he was handcuffed. Obviously he was incredibly drunk and had wandered into the wrong house. It was the one night that we forgot to lock our doors, so my family used to celebrate bonfire night when I lived in the UK. If you don't know what that is, well, you probably should have listened. In history class anyway, our tradition was to buy paper lanterns, write notes to everyone that we lost, put them inside, light them up and watch them burn out into the sky. It's pretty beautiful now that I think about it. I was at my grandma's when this happened, and we were all in the back garden from memory after letting go. We cheered and cried, but we were happy at one point. My memories are a bit hazy, but the things that stood out were so vivid in my head. I was on my mom's shoulders and everyone was talking about my great-aunt, who'd passed several years before. She was the rock to the family, and my first ever memory of my entire life is with her. In fact, now the next-door neighbor's house was dark and nobody was inside. For context, there was a small alleyway in between the two houses that led to a door to the main road. I couldn't see much as it was night time, but I looked at the neighbor's house and around until I saw this little girl with very long white hair, and dressed in all white too. It really felt like she was glowing in the dark. Almost she was walking down the alleyway, and I freaked out instantly, and started crying and screaming at my mom that there was a girl walking down the alleyway. They checked, but there was no one there. Mom said that I was just too tired and needed to go to get some sleep. Weird from her, since she's a big ghost believer, and so I thought that she would believe me. But anyway, now the next part is extra weird. So I actually got the chance to speak to the neighbors one time after this. I don't know how long after, but I was still pretty young. I used to be a bit of a weird kid that was sociable to anyone. Thank you, ADHD, but the man was a really nice guy with a really cute dog. His dog had jumped over the fence to see me in my grandma's garden while I was playing, and this led to a conversation with the neighbor. I asked outright if they had a kid, and he told me no, and that they were waiting for the dog to pass to try and have one. But they were a young couple, and I was honestly pretty shook by this. I told him what I saw that night. He took a while to respond, but when he did, he told me to sit down next to him, and he looked me in the eyes and said, "I believe you, I've already seen her before. Don't worry, you're not crazy," something like that. But out of nowhere he drops a bombshell on me saying that in any case our brains are like cylinders on a satellite in space being controlled by something, and whatever we perceive as life is just simulation. Obviously these are not his exact words, but it was something close to this. He continued, "That's why I know you're not lying, and that's why ghosts exist." He looked visibly freaked out, told me that I should leave, and I never ever saw them again after that, which is kind of crazy. It was a very strange experience, both the girl that I saw and the conversation with this guy. I don't know if he actually believed what he was saying or if he was just saying it to try and make me feel better, but whatever the case, it was strange. I went to a wedding of my friend Courtney about 2 days ago, and I still cannot shake my mind over what happened. For context, I grew up in a very religious household and went to a church every Sunday, and Courtney is probably the only person from my old church that I still keep in contact with. The situation started at the reception. Courtney was super excited to see me, and was definitely the only person who felt that way. Judging from all the stares from the people at my old church, I sat down at my table and started playing something on my phone. When some guy sat next to me, he said that the seating chart said that he was supposed to sit at my table, and introduced himself as the groom's friend, Anthony. He was pretty cute, so I spent a lot of time talking to him, and we really hit it off. He didn't seem to judge me for being an atheist and seemed genuinely interested in me. When the dance started, they started playing Brownie Girl and he offered to dance with me. We danced together for most of the night, until he left to go to the bathroom, and a little later I did too. When I came out, I saw that my purse wasn't on the table, which was weird, because I swore that I left it on there. I was tired though, and thought that I had just left it in my car, so I went into the parking lot, and into my car to look for it, and found it on the center console. I still brought it inside, but at that point it was pretty late in the night, so I didn't think too much of it. I danced some more and noticed Anthony was gone. I asked the groom, who said that he had gone home because he wasn't feeling too good, and pretty soon I started feeling pretty sick too myself. So I said bye to Courtney and went to my car, as I put my keys in the ignition. I looked behind me and saw something weird. It looked like something had ducked down from the trunk. I took my keys out and looked back there, and that was when I saw him. Anthony was crouched down in the trunk of my car. I started screaming and ran out with him chasing after me. I went inside and told Courtney, who immediately told her husband, who walked me back to my car, where Anthony was nowhere to be seen. Courtney's husband said that he didn't see his car anywhere, so he probably left. I left and I still feel sick to my stomach thinking about it. He could have easily gone home with me and killed me if I hadn't have looked back. Courtney said that she feels terrible that she invited him, and that she had no idea that he would do that. I haven't stepped out of my house since, because I'm worried that if I do that, he'll be waiting for me like he was before. The last couple of days have been a bit crazy for me, but unfortunately my address was on my ID, and, as I learned now, Anthony took photos of it. Anthony and the groom aren't exactly friends, but they know each other well enough for him to be invited. After the whole fiasco, the groom tried to text Anthony about it, but got no response. Anthony showed up at my job, and was lurking around the parking lot before he ran off. When he saw security, he left me a note on my windshield that just says I'm watching security at my job has been notified about him, so hopefully I'm safe there. I was told by other people that went to the wedding that he was introducing himself as my boyfriend, and that he was planning on proposing. I am currently trying to file a restraining order against him and feel horrified. He lives in my city and knows where I live, so I'm staying at my aunt's house as I speak, and if anything else happens, I'll be sure to let you guys know. So last night was the first night in well a long time that I'd been alone overnight, as my boyfriend went to visit his mother for the weekend. I was talking on the phone when suddenly my call seemed to have been hijacked, and a raspy female whisper with a kind of static sound began to speak in words that I didn't understand, and I quickly got the feeling that I needed to end the call, which I did almost immediately. A short time later, I hear a soft tapping, almost like someone lightly packing cigarettes right outside of my door, and I have no idea what it was. It went on sort of rhythmically for a couple of minutes, then stopped. Obviously I was pretty spooked by this, but went to sleep a while later without further incident. Then, shortly after I woke up this morning, I heard a male voice, but it didn't sound like a real person. It sounded like an old record. It was very high statusy, and I couldn't understand some things it said, but it did keep repeating like hey and hi right outside of my door. Neither of these occurrences are particularly worrying, but altogether it gives me the creeps. I'm wondering too, if anybody else has experienced anything that you can't see, but can hear like this, and that instant feeling that, whatever it is, you shouldn't acknowledge it and that it isn't good. My mom's father died when she was around 18, and ever since I can remember, she frequently visited his grave at the cemetery, decorating it, visiting and so on. When I was too little to be left alone and my dad wasn't home, she would always take me with her too. Ever since I can remember, I have hated that cemetery. Being there always made me anxious, scared, gave me bad vibes, whatever you want to call it. I would always refuse to get out of the car at first, until inevitably being alone, sitting in the car got too scary. So I got out. The grave isn't far from where you'd park your car on the pathway thing, so I could get out and join my mom easily enough because of this. There's a tree nearby between the graves and the road. Getting out of the car always made the feeling worse. Even if I was with my mother, I couldn't wait to get home. This went on for years too, until a few years ago, when I was around 16, I believe, my mom told me a story that literally made my jaw drop. Now, I hadn't gotten out of the car during that visit, and when she got back in, she said, "You know, you've never liked being here, and ever since the first time me and your dad brought you as a baby, it's always been like that," and then proceeded to tell me a story that made the whole thing make a lot more sense. Apparently, when I was a little baby, old enough to sit up on my own, and such, I think, my mom and dad took me to the cemetery to visit my grandpa's grave. I was sitting in the grass happy, and all they were keeping an eye on me, but weren't like all eyes on me sort of thing. I was looking up in the aforementioned tree between the graves and the road, and all of a sudden I just started screaming like I was being actively stabbed or something. I was just completely terrified. My parents scooped me up and checked me over. There's no answer bugs on me or on the ground where I was, but I kept crying until they left eyeing the tree. I don't remember what I saw in the tree, obviously, or I would describe it, but whatever it was, it scared me so bad that it must have scarred me or something after she finished. It made much more sense to me why I never liked that place, and was also just so anxious to be there. I just got back from a mini vacation with my wife in Pigeon Forge, Tennessee. The cabin was in a populated area, but hidden from the road on top of a hill. My first impression was that it was a little bit eerie, but I brushed it off and assumed that it was just because of the horror movies that I had recently watched. The energy inside felt a little bit heavy, but nothing that I couldn't handle. I'm very sensitive when it comes to paranormal energies, and I've lived and worked in haunted places all of my life. This cabin was different, though the dark energy was overwhelming and I didn't sleep until daylight for the 3 nights that we were there. In the end, I had to sit in the living room, where I saw shadows and the cord on the wall-mounted phone swing, and suddenly start and stop again. For more scares, subscribe.